All right. Hello, Last Planet, Tabby Happy.
Hello.
Pleasure to have you gentlemen here. Today I'm going to be presenting on railroad ecology and more specifically a study on the environmental impact of high powered rail lines and mill lines that I'm talking about here. Construction of rail lines in Georgia began right on the Savannah River, just in South Carolina, and they expanded all the way to Macon, which ended up being a major hub for rail lines in the state of Georgia. If you've ever been in Macon, it's kind of hard to miss them.
Okay.
Um, and what ended up happening was during the Civil War, Milledgeville was under heavy construction,
Why was
and
that?
well, and alongside the construction of Milledgeville, we wanted to be able to transport goods between it and Macon. So we built a rail line that connects it. I think you can see it on this map here that I made using ArcGIS. What I did here was I found an online layer of the United States railways, and I imported that onto the base map alongside the 48 states layer. I used the select by location tool to sort of isolate both of those layers into one. After that, I exported it and used the clip tool to get rid of any excess lines, and I put it on the layout here.
Okay.
Moving on, some background
Is this your
for
train?
what I'm going to be talking about. Yeah, this is actually my train. I'm actually the conductor of this train, but you know, railroad ecology is sort of an abstract term. It's an understudied field of ecology just because they're not as prominent as like roads that would cause, sort of habitat fragmentation is what kind of you think of when it comes to roads, but that's also something that railroads can affect. You know, they're essential to the nation. They were built to, whether through transportation of people or transportation of goods, connect it across many states, and that's kind of had an adverse effect on wildlife. So, the four main impacts that we see are, obviously wildlife mortality from being hit by the train or other effects, the barrier effect, which is just kind of creating this barrier in between habitats, habitat fragmentation, which splits them up. Obviously cutting through it is going to create some habitat loss and just general disturbances, noise, debris, like as in rail pikes falling into water or things along that line. So, kind of what prompted this whole thing, this whole project of mine, is I was walking along this section of railroad and I came across this wetland environment that had a group of white-tailed deer crossing the railroad and feeding out of it. Just drinking water, and further up north from that wetland environment, I ran into a dead possum, and it kind of got me thinking about this GIS project and how I wanted to represent what this wildlife might be going through here. So the questions that I wanted to kind of propose were: what land cover types exist along these local rail lines? What wildlife lives alongside them? And what preventative measures can be made to ensure that this wildlife doesn't have to go through any adverse effects that is being caused by these major rail lines. This very simple map on the left, you can see that I digitized the specific wetland environment that I'm talking about with the polygon tool, and then imported it into a layout. Okay, let's see. So here, what I did was, at first I wanted to establish what land cover types were on this line to Milledgeville. So what I ended up doing was I selected the line that I wanted. So I went, Milledgeville going south all the way to Cooper's. It's probably about a 6 to 8 mile stretch somewhere in that range. So what I ended up doing was creating a buffer using the buffer tool of about 200 meters on both sides of the tracks. I clipped the 2024 land cover raster to said buffer zone and added an area field to the attribute table uh, using the calculate field feature to multiply the pixel count by 900, giving me the area in meters squared, I believe. So what we ended up finding out was actually pretty interesting about this. Yeah, as you can see here, developed open space land is easily the most consistent, 18% out of like the, about 15 different types of land cover here. But outside of the developed open space land is kind of what I'm more interested in. The forest, the evergreen forest, obviously at the largest, 16%, followed by woody wetlands at 15, mixed forest at 12, deciduous forest at 9, and then everything else from there on out, 5%, 3%, 1%. It gets into small land cover types. What I did here was I took the data from the attribute table after I, ran the area, and I imported it into Excel, creating this bar graph and this pie chart after I converted the area into percentages. And these are the results. But what do these results mean is ultimately what we're trying to get here. So the implications of this are, the biological makeup of these evergreen forests, of these mixed forests, of these deciduous forests is about what you would expect to find in Georgia. Obviously, white-tailed deer, coyotes, bobcats, which is what our school's mascot is.
And these
Possum,
photos,
flat
these
down
are
dead
like
along that. Yeah, actually, I actually took these photos. I don't know if you knew that. Last, I can hear you clipping your toenails. That's rather rude during a presentation. I don't respect that.
Wow.
Last, I don't. I took this photo in this little game called Red Dead Redemption 2. A little known banger. I don't know if you've heard of it, but there's also some various bird species in the area. The red cockaded woodpecker, which is actually an endangered species and should be protected at all costs. And we're going to kind of get into that later. But there's also amphibian species, your box turtles, your gray rat snake, your indigo snake, things like that, and all of which are prone to harm, especially with the presence of these tracks, especially with these wetland environments alongside these tracks that they might rely on for feeding. So what can be done, right? We know that they're in danger. We know that things like this are happening. Matter of fact, just in March of 2026, I believe it was in Minnesota, there was a train going along a woody environment, and it was transporting corn, I believe, and there was a spillage occurring, and the corn was spilled all out along the tracks, deer on the tracks, obviously. And I believe the total death toll was somewhere near 100 deer that died along those tracks because they were hit just sitting there feeding. So what can be done about that, right? Well, let's see. You know, there's a few solutions. Things like underpasses or culverts. You can see it in that top left image right there. Stuff that will generally reduce the barrier effect is what I am for. That seems to be the most effective way. Yeah, of just opening up these environments and making it less likely that they're going to get hit. But also, you can restrict access. Something like exclusion fences is a little extreme. You can see that in the bottom left image. I'm not all for that. It does greatly reduce mortality rates, but at the end of the day, something like that increases the barrier effect, and you're going to end up spending more money because if you build these exclusion fences, you're really going to also have to build some sort of underpass for creatures that end up within the exclusion fence. So, I really feel like exclusion fences are a little much, but there's other things you can do. You can reduce train speed at mortality hotspots, or, for example, maybe during a migration period, you can reduce it. Rid vegetation near the tracks. This is where, a lot of deer are going to go to feed. Try to keep them not staying on the tracks as much as we can. Something else you can do, we can cap nearby power lines to reduce nesting from local bird species. This is especially relevant in Millersville with something like your red cockaded woodpecker, which is endangered. The last thing you want is for one of those to have a nest on a nearby power line, and it, from the vibrations that the train is causing as it goes on, it just falls out, and mortality rate is going to increase on those easily. So at the end of the day, the conclusions we're coming to here: rail lines are obviously essential. There's no getting rid of them. similar to roads, we have to learn to work with them. The potential harm they're presenting to all of these species is substantial and it's understudied. There's a lot of research that can be done in this field. Tracks just outside of Milledgeville, Georgia, go through long stretches of deciduous, evergreen, and mixed forests that house many at-risk species. And corporations like BNSF, like Union Specific, like CSX, like Norfolk Southern. Norfolk Southern specifically is the railroad that we were talking about today. These need to be made aware and held accountable for damage upon these environments and upon these species. Thank you. That's it.
Okay, one question. Corporations would they be happy with the image in the background?
I actually think that's AI. I think that's AI generated, so I don't think they would mind too much.